Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. We are learning together on the topic of from the Shaila Archive. We have a few topics that are very apropos. These are actually three questions that I received in the last last 2 weeks. So these are all very contemporary issues. Now, question number one is what happens if a person has to remove something on the skin, has to undergo a light anesthetic, an anesthetic called a waking anesthetic. A person could be woken up from during the course of that, and the question is does the anesthetic itself require Birkas Hagomel, and B, does it require, once the concern is if the actual item which was removed from the skin is perhaps a stage 0 cancer, does one wait till the biopsy to the report to the pathology, or does that require Birkas Hagomel, and we'll call it B2, does that require Hagomel once when Refuah finds the report? That's no question. That's all part of question one. Question number two is if, let's say, a woman undergoes significant surgery and she needs to say Birkas Hagomel, may she say that bracha in front of 10 women? Is that a possibility? And question number three is, can somebody else say Hagomel for you? And if so, does it have to be in your presence? Those are three questions. These are questions that have come up recently and worthwhile trying to unpack them a little bit. So these are technical details, but it takes us back to a very important discussion. So this discussion actually starts in Tehillim Kuf Zayin 107, one of the most important paragraphs in all of Tehillim. Very, very beautiful paragraph Tehillim. It's exceptionally long, as it happens to be. It's 43 psukim long, and if you'll look at it, there is a refrain which keeps coming back. That refrain is Yoidul Hashem Chastov Nifloesav Livnei Adam. That Hashem, praiseworthy be Hashem in His kindness and His wonders to humankind. Ki Yispia Nefesh Hakekov and Nefesh Reiva Milei Tov. And because HaKadosh Baruch Hu satiated the soul which was searching, and the ravenous soul Milei Tovi filled with goodness. That appears numerous times. It appears in Pasuk Ches to Tes, and then it's going to be again in Pasuk Chaf Aleph and Chaf Beis. So this is going to come up again and again. Now it's the refrain of 4 episodes that occur, 4 stories which are told in this Tehillim. The first is in Pasuk Beis and Gimel. So the first episode is Yom Regu'ulei Hashem Esher Golam Yadsar Ume'artzos Kibtzom Mizrach Umemara Mitzalfon Miyam. So that's the general idea, is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves these people. What does it mean? Tov Bamidbar V'Yishimon Derech Ir Moshav Loi Matza'u. So there's people who are wayward. They're looking around the desert. They're sojourning. They're traveling through the desert. They lose their way. They don't have food. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they call out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Pasuk Vav Vayitzak Kol Hashem Etzar Lohem Mitzukosem Yatzileim V'yadrichem B'derech Yeshara Leches El Ir Moshav, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows them to find an oasis. HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows them to find a civilization again. Therefore, Yodul Hashem Chastoi Niflasav Livnei Adam, so they praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Second situation that's described as a Pasuk Tes, Pasuk Yud, Yosher Choshev Etzamoves Asirei Ani Ubarzel. These are people who are found incarcerated in iron. So these are people who are in prison, and Kimru Imrei Kel, they got there because they didn't do the right thing in life, and they call out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in their darkness. In Pasuk Gimel, Vayizak Kol Hashem Etzar Lohem Mitzukosem Yashiyem, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes them out of their darkness, and therefore they thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Pasuk Tesvav again. Then we hear about in Pasuk Yud Zayin, Evilim Miderech Pishomim Ve'anosam Yisanu Kol Oichel Tatayev Navshoma Agiu Ad Sharei Mavis. People who can't eat anymore. They're in such a state of sickness that they can't even sustain themselves. Vayizak Kol Hashem Etzar Lohem Mitzukosem Yashiyem. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu will save them and send their refuah in Pasuk Chav Yishlach Tvorah V'Yipo'em. Then again they thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And finally, the 4th episode that's described over here is in Pasuk Chav Gimel, Yordei Hayam Ba'aniyos Oisei Melacha B'Mayim Rabim. A person who's a seafarer, a sailor, goes out to the sea. V'Hema Ro Ma'aseh Hashem Niflosav Mitzulah. And they see in the depth of the ocean the acts of God. Vayomar Vayamad Ruach Sora Batromim Galav, and there's a storm, there's waves, they're threatened to be destroyed. It's like a wall that comes upon them. They call out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Pasuk Chav Ches, Vayitzak Kol Hashem Batzar Lamim Mitzukosem Yatziyem Yakum Sara L'Dumama V'Yecheshuk Aleim. The storm silences, the waves go down, they arrive back at the port, and again, Yodel Hashem Chastav Niflas Livnei Adam. So it's a story of 4 sets of people going through 4 sets of situations which are described, and a person will say, "Thank you, K'tai Kodesh Baruch Hu." It's worthwhile noting this. There's a lot to unpack in this. This is not a Pirush on Tehillim Kuf Zayin, but it is worthwhile noting that this is that there's lots of ways of looking at this. One way of looking at this might be a story of all of Jewish history. And that is that in order to get back to the land of Israel, the nation of Israel have had to go through deserts, and they've had to go through seas, and they've had to go through sickness and incarceration to make their way over the mountains and the seas to get back to the land of Israel. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in all those different stages in history, has allowed us back. That's one way of looking at it, which is sort of a holistic perspective, the arc of Jewish history. But it's worthwhile noting that this may not be a historical, but rather actually reflecting on these particular instances that a person goes through now. In fact, this was actually known as the Pilgrim's Prayer in the last 250 years. Why? Because, just quoting Stephen Lawson on this psalm, a favorite psalm of the English Puritans who sailed to American source to Psalm 107 came to know as the Pilgrim's Psalm. Under the leadership of William Bradford, the Pilgrims courageously crossed the Atlantic Ocean in search of religious freedom in the New World, and found that as they landed in America, the Pilgrims came ashore at Plymouth Rock on Monday, December 11th, 1620, after having spent the previous day worshipping God aboard their ship, the Mayflower. Governor William Bradford, in his account of the Plymouth plantation, explicitly referred to Psalm 107. His well-known summation of their achievement was based virtually verbatim on Psalm 107. So, you can imagine this, and it relates directly to the experiences that they have gone through, certainly the sea aspect of it. And this is a universal psalm that people turn to when expressing thanksgiving to God for going through difficult situations in life. But not only is it about, we'll call it, a poetic expression, it's also a halachic expression as well. Because, technically speaking, a person who went through these 4 situations in life, at the times of the Beis Hamikdash, would bring a korban todah. These would be the 4 requirements to bring the korban todah, which would be accompanied with 40 loaves of bread. And famously, the Netziv points out that the amount of time to eat those bread, which is really essentially a day and a half, is completely impossible for one person to consume. So it's necessary, L'cha ezbach zevach todah v'shem Hashem ekra, that I will sacrifice to you the zevach todah, the thanksgiving offering. Uv'shem Hashem ekra, I'll call out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Netziv explains in his commentary on Tehillim, because remember the Netziv actually comments on the Torah in Ha'emek Davar, but in his footnotes called Harchev Davar, it usually refers to his explanation in Nach. So in the Harchev Davar, when he describes in Parashas Tzav, talking about the Korban Todah, he says that by necessity you have to invite other people to partake of your Korban Todah, because you're not going to be able to finish it within the requisite amount of time. And that's what it means, Uv'shem Hashem ekra, I'll call out in the name of God, because I'm going to have to tell everybody that I just made it through the desert in my caravan and it was successful. They're going to say, why are you inviting me to the Suda? The answer is because of what I just went through. I was just healed from some sort of sickness. So therefore, the means to say that I cannot keep my miracle, my experience private. I have to tell it to everybody else. That's the Korban Todah. We don't have the Korban Todah today. The Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed. What do we do? So that has now taken a new form. It's taken a form of what we call the Birkas Hagomel. That's what the Gemara says in source 3. The Gemara in Brachos Daf Nun Dalan Beis, where most of this is found. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Arba tzrichim l'hodos. There are 4 people who require saying a Birkas Hagomel. Yordei Hayam, those who go to sea. Halchei Midbaros, those who go through the desert. Mishaya Chalev v'nisrape, a person who is sick and God heals. Umishaya Chavush b'veis asurim yatzah, a person who is in prison and escaped or was released. In that case, a person should say Birkas Hagomel. Brilliant. Okay, good. Notice that we're not doing it inside, but the continuation of the Gemara learns it directly from each of the psukim in Tehillim Kuf Zayin. It's the format for the 4 types over here. In fact, it's well known that this is also hinted to in the pasuk which says V'chol hachayim yodu chasera. All those who are alive will thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chaim stands for Choyle, Yam, Yotzei, Mesosorim, and Midbar. Right, so those refer to the 4 cases where that all of life, referring to those 4 incidents, will thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Great. Okay, so this is debate.
That the Shira by the Yam, we actually were saved from all 4 of these domains.
Very good.
So it was a collective
desert.
Exodus.
So there's Oz. Excellent. Yeah, this became known as the God's song long before the pilgrims were invented. So there's a lot to talk about over here. This is the format for it. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan takes it one step further, and he says, look, there are different types of experiences that we have. There's supernatural experiences and there's natural experiences. Supernatural experiences, that's like Egypt, right? So that's like the Makos, that's the sea. Natural experiences is I make parnos on a daily basis. You know, I work, I earn money, and I sustain my family. So those are the 2 extremes. He says, but there's a middle road. In between the 2, there's a gray area. Take a look at source 4, the second paragraph. V'yesh od min shlishi. There is a third type of circumstance in our life. Memutza ben anisimu ben atziviyos. That's between the miracles and between natural experiences in our lives. V'hainu she'inyan she'holech b'teva aval yotzei me'im gema'at migeder ha'teva el teva nisiyos. That a person is living in a natural circumstance, but there's a, so to speak, there's a shadow of something supernatural. Ve'ledugma ha'over orchos yamim. A person goes through the sea. Teva, that's a natural course of events. Person's out there at the mercy of the deep sea, and there's nothing that a person can do to do that. You know, one's going down in the submersible, like, you know, you have no control over what's going to be in the end. The storm stops. The pressure stops building. It's a person's able to. So technically speaking, it's natural. But when you're in that boat, you don't feel that there's going to be a natural outcome. Deserts where a person is sick. You can't say it's a miracle, right? Umatzdik olav adin ba'bracha she'yisurim she'egia lov have mipnei chata'ov atzalasoi gumulas tovai. So in this case, you're recognizing that middle ground where it is natural, but the fact that the natural lined up in such a way that all the ducks are in line, that I walked out of this, that's where the Birkas Hagomel applies itself. Yes.
What's about a cruise? You taking a cruise?
Good question. Yeah, that's what they asked on the Titanic too. I say.
There were no icebergs in this.
Yeah, anyways, but it's a bit as a may. So it's one has to yeah. If one's going across the sea still today, the seas still. I think we should forget our hubris that we think we've got it all covered. There's no guarantees when you go out on these things. One has to do this. The question is, are you allowed to go into something which, right? Are you allowed to actively choose to do this? But the truth is that people have to make their living. People have to have entertainment. So this is something that people do. But be it as it may, I mean, there's still no guarantees. Even today, I mean, on the high seas, there's still pirates, folks. I'm just saying, like if you're out there, you know, every time I see a container ship in the New York harbor, you know what I'm saying? I think about what they must have gone to get from China to here. You know, and there's a lot of hijackings. There's a lot of bad things that go on in the high seas. So it's not so simple even today. But be it as it may. So the question is like, so how bad does it have to be? So, like, how bad does it need to be to get there? This relates to sickness, to travel, and so on. How far does it go? So it happens to be this is a debate in the Rishonim. 800 years ago, this is a debate. The Ramban and the Rosh talk about this. The Ramban Nachmanides has a sefer which is called Torah Sa'adam. We don't have so much of the writings of the Ramban. We have a number of scattered commentaries of the Ramban. Famously, his commentary on the Torah is very accessible. There's a set of Torah called the Kisvei Ramban, published with the commentary of Rav Shuval. And in the Kisvei Ramban, there's a halachic sefer called Torah Sa'adam. In that, the Ramban talks about lots of topics. He talks about the halachas of Avelus, and he also talks about the halachas that pertain to sickness as well. So in the Torah Sa'adam, by Inyan Refuah, he says in source 5, Birkas Hagomel lav davka b'choli sheyesh bo sakana. V'lo b'maka shel chalav dafka. It doesn't have to be a person's deathly ill to say Birkas Hagomel. Ela kol she'ala lemita v'yorad tzarich lahodos. A person gets a fever, a person's put in bed. That's enough to say Birkas Hagomel. Mibnei she'doime kamoi she'elu legardum lidon v'tzarich praklatin gedolim linatzel. If once you're in the dock, you need to have agencies to advocates to protect you. That's enough. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed mercy in the situation. Once you step into bed, that's a problem. He says, and he says the same thing over here when it comes to travel. It can be also minor travel, where not even a cruise, but minor travel is sufficient to warrant it. That's the Ramban suggests the Nachmanides. Just remember quickly, where did the Ramban live? He lived in Spain, and in the end of the day, he was ejected because of publishing the transcript of the debate he had with Pablo Cristiani, and he then made his way to Israel. But just remember that he's referring to the days in Spain. The Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, who lived where? Just curiosity. Rabbeinu Asher lived in Germany. He made his way to Toledo afterwards because of he made his way through France because his mentor was taken to captivity and died in captivity, the Maram at Rottenburg. And when he realized that there was an X on his back, he made his way out of Germany. The Jews, wherever we're allowed to exist. So he made his way to Toledo. He was welcomed in by the Rashba, Rav Shlomo ben Ibn Aderes. He welcomed him into Spain. But Birazameh, just to put things in perspective, and he says, "V'na'agu ba'Ashkenaz uvet Tzarfas," and he says the minhag in Germany and in France. How does he know the minhag there? Because he lived there and he traveled through France before he got to Spain. He says the minhag, the Rosh is very helpful in this respect because he has a more longitudinal perspective of European minhagim, right? Because he traveled from Germany to France to Spain. So he says, Ashkenaz tzarfa she'enu varachim Birkas Hagomel k'sheholchen me'ir le'ir. They don't say Birkas Hagomel when you go from city to city. Well, say to Paris, that's a regular trip. Only if you're going through a really well-known desert, a place that's got bandits, it's got wild animals, then you can say that. Yerushalmi says that all the roads are considered dangerous. That refers to Tfilas Haderech. So yes, when I go from city to city, I certainly say Tfilas Haderech. HaKadosh Baruch Hu help me get from place to place. But that you need to ask for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mercy from place to place. But the Birkas Hagomel is a korban Torah that you don't have. Everybody who go to Yerushalayim would have to say bring a korban Torah otherwise, right? They travel from Ashdod to Yerushalayim. They don't bring a korban Torah. You say Tfilas Haderech. But now, if you're going through a dangerous place, that's when it warrants a Birkas. It's a higher bar to require a Birkas Torah. And he says similarly there, V'chein kosav harav Rebbe Yosef Zal tafko cholesh shenaf alamita. It has to be something where it's really a significant sickness in order for a person to warrant having the Birkas Hagomel the same way, paralleling the traveling, right? There's city to city traveling and there's desert traveling. Desert traveling is dangerous. City to city is an understood risk that we take, and therefore we say Tfilas Haderech but not Birkas Hagomel. This debate happens to express itself in halacha. So the Torah Rabbeinu Yaakov, who's the son of Rabbeinu Asher, quotes both these opinions of the Ramban and of the Rosh. And ultimately in Shulchan Aruch, it how does it come out in the wash? Says the Shulchan Aruch in source 8, B'chol choli tzarich levarech afilu eino chole shel sakona v'lo maka shel chalol el kol she'ola lemita v'yorad mipnei shedoime k'mi she'olo legardom. Says the Shulchan Aruch, who is he paskening like? The Ramban, like Nachmanides, he paskens that even an inconsequential sickness would require Birkas Hagomel. However, Hagos, says Rav Moshe Isserles, remember, coming from Europe, Eastern Europe, following the Ashkenazi tradition, not the Sephardi tradition of the Ramban. V'yesh amrim de'ena mevarech rak al cholesh yesh bo sakona k'goy makal shel chalal. And he says that really one should only do it if one has a very significant sickness. That's what the Ramah says, which means that in practice the Sephardim are a lot more liberal about their Birkas Hagomel than the Ashkenazim, because the Sephardim are following the trajectory of the Ramban, whereas the Ashkenazim follow the trajectory of the Rosh as to how significant a danger a person has to go through as well. What does that mean today? So in the Sefer Piskei Teshuvos, which is on the Orach Chaim section of Shulchan Aruch, very fascinating. He makes the following observation, and he says the following. He gives us a few guidelines which are helpful to be aware of. Source 9. On the right hand side, he says, Makal Shel Chalal, Kol Minei Nituchim Pnimiyim. If you have any internal operations, right? So anything which requires being opened up, Va'afilu hapshutim biyoser, even simple operations. Ach bizmanenu yesh ladun im naasim bahardama mekomis. One has to ask if it's only local or general anesthetic. So if it's general anesthetic, the general rule is that a person should say Birkas Hagomel. Thank you, Dr. Liederman. And if a person is having local anesthetic, perhaps less so because it's less consequential. V'chein hatkafei leiv v'kalayos umarav v'koveint v'riyas v'kadaymer. Anything which has to do with one's liver, one's lungs, one's kidneys, anything which is going to, even laparoscopically, a person would require saying a Birkas Hagomel l'shelefi divrei harofeh matapel hoya b'matzav shel sakana. Usually, if a person is having an operation on internal organs, it's something which is of significance and danger. Even if, God forbid, there's a potential of return. Let's say the doctors say it's not a dangerous situation. Person was bedridden for 3 days. That's pretty significant, right? So even if it's not a dangerous situation, but a person is bedbound for 3 days, that would also warrant a Birkas Hagomel. And if you needed admission to a hospital for that would be significant. When exiting that would be sufficient grounds for Birkas Hagomel. מי שנכלא במחלס השיסוק, אפילו שיסוק חלקי באיבורים מסוימים שבגוף, שלא בו מחמס הצטננוס גרידה, אלא מחמס בעיוס פנימיוס וקלי דם פגומים, מבורך הגומל כשנצרה במחלסו והולך על בוריו. So certain types of, I think he was referring to a type of paralysis of sorts, that even local paralysis, and one would say Birkas Hagomel. אבל, מחלויס ויריליוס לסוגייהן. Different types of viral infections. Let's say a person gets a fever, even let's say internal concerns, let's say it affects, let's say a person gets some sort of degree of walking pneumonia, it sounds like to me. Even if they are accompanied with a temperature. The doctors say take a course of antibiotics. The person is not bedridden, thank God. And the person maybe took the day off but wasn't bedbound. The Sfarim would be say this. Let's say a person has a broken hand, broken foot, he has to go to put in a cast. Or avar tipul cosmetical. Let's say a person had some sort of cosmetic surgery, right? So they're opening up let's say an airway in their nose. So what was that?
Facelift.
A facelift, a nose job, or tzipule shinaim l'sugeihem, or let's say dental work of sorts. In that case, afilu l'shitas ha'shulchan aruch l'minhag sfarad ein levarach Birkas Hagomel. Even if a person has to be bedridden for this, kol she'ena machmas michul shemachmas choili pnimi, ela machmas kevim chazakim asher moniim b'ladoi militavkeit. So if something which is, this is cosmetic or it's just pain related, it's not something which is putting a person in bed would not say Birkas Hagomel. It's just a helpful gradation of this. And then he talks about, interestingly, chole ruach. What's chole ruach? Mental illness, he says. I shall pi divrei harofim tzarich hesger o ishpuz. The person needs to be admitted to hospital for this. Rachman litzon. Shenisra b'mvarech hagomel. That's equally as concern for Birkas Hagomel as well. So what about when a person undergoes in a particular situation, a person undergoes a anesthetic, but not general anesthesia, but it's a anesthesia that a person can be woken up from in the middle of. That's number one. And number two is that there's a very significant removal of what could be concerned a stage 0 or maybe even stage 1 cancerous growth on the body. what would the halacha be in that case? So I spoke to Dr. Abram Steinberg, who was the posek for Shari Tzedek, and he mentioned to me that a waking anesthesia, an anesthesia which a person can be woken up from the middle, is not like a general, and they would not have the requirement just because of that for Birkas Hagomel. And when it comes to the removal, one can't really say Birkas Hagomel until just with the pathology. One needs to actually know what that one is being cured from it. Therefore, if the test results come back and they said, yes, we did a good job, this was a stage 0 or stage 1 and removed everything, then they warrant Birkas Hagomel. But if it's just diagnosing that this was, but there's future work to do, God forbid, then that would not require Birkas Hagomel, because that's not the end of the tunnel yet, so necessarily as well. But if they do discover that this was some form of potential cancer and it has been removed, then that's not just a pathology, that's actually a recovery as well. In that case, then there would be the requirement of Birkas Hagomel that would require waiting for the pathology report. That's just an interesting application of these halachos. It's important to see the background in order to apply it to this. Now, question number 2 is, what about saying a Birkas Hagomel for women in front of a group of women? So let's go back to this. Remember, our source text for Birkas Hagomel is Tehillim 107. And Tehillim 107 actually talks about how it is meant to be said. So as an example, in source 10, the Gemara in Brachos continues to say, Ma mevarach Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Barach Gomel Chasadam Tavim, Abaye Amar B'tzorech Lo'oduya Kamar Sarah. Abaye says it needs to be in front of, or Lo'oduya is an interesting word to use, but Lo'oduya literally means to admit, right? So you need to admit or to go through this or to thank in front of 10 people. Dichsiv v'yiramamuhu bikal am. And that's the pasuk Lamed Beis in this pasuk is you will v'yiramamu, and HaKadosh Baruch will be elevated bikal am, among people. So it needs to be, what's a kahal usually? A minyan, right? So it needs to be in front of a minyan. Umar Zutra Amar utrain minayo derabanon shenemar v'moshav zakenim yahaleluhu. And the continuation of that pasuk is v'moshav zakenim. So it needs to be not just the regular proletariat, it needs to also be educated people who can appreciate what it is that you went through in order to be able, that adds significance and gravitas to this as well. The Gemara goes on to ask, well, does that mean, should there be 10 people who are Zakanim? No, or just a minimum of 2 are Zakanim of the 10, but that's the one that's the degree that one should be trying to go through. So what does this look like in halacha? So it sounds like, sorry.
Does that mean you have to tell the 10 people what you went through?
I think so, yeah, sure, I think so. But usually that's what happens, because think about this story. What happens? A person comes and says Birkas Hagomel. Everybody comes over and says, what happened? Right? And that, by the way, I think not only is that just because of our morbid curiosity, but actually that's precisely a reflection of what the Birkas, the Korban Torah was supposed to be. The Korban Torah was supposed to be a public display where people say, oh my goodness, I'm so happy for you that you made it through the desert. I'm so happy that you're healed. That's precisely what it is. Most people don't want that. Most people kind of, want to sort of slip under the radar, just say my Birkas Hagomel, mumble quickly, and then I'm done. But that's not what it's meant to be. It's v'yiramamu bikal am. Yes.
It's a beautiful thing because it's over Lasiyasan, because first you make the bracha and then everybody asks what happened.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what happens after shul. A person says Birkas Hagomel. Everyone wants to know what happened over here. Everything all right? Is everything all right on the road? Usually it's a traffic incident, unfortunately. So these are the things that allows a person to process it in a community, and people are very concerned, and and some people are just curious, but a lot of people are very concerned. So that's what happens over here. This is halacha, yes.
The sharing thing maybe a little more connected to the Sudat Hoda'ah, where that's like the next level. Yeah,
it's true. So there is the notion of making a Sudat Hadah and to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's usually on an anniversary or when one gets through it. But this is the first thing. In fact, the halacha is one should do it as close to recovery or ascent from issue as possible. One should not wait as long as possible, or one should try. This is very much sort of when the metal is hot. That's supposed to be. So what happens if I don't have that? So let's say I don't have the wherewithal to be able to be v'yiramamu bikal am. I don't have that capacity. So the Torah, again, Rabbeinu Yaakov, in codifying halacha into what we have today, take a look at source 12, the bottom line. He says, V'im berech afilu papachos me'asara. You don't have 10 people. Ein sorich lachzor levarech. Let's say I didn't think I'm going to get a minyan. I live in Yehupitzville. I gathered together my 3 best friends who happen to be Jewish, and those are the only people who live here. I say Birkas Hagomel. They'll say Baruch Gomalcha Kol Tov Sela. Fantastic. You don't need to go back, and now you happen to be in town next week to the big town, and you have a minyan. You don't need to say another bracha again. But Tzarich Lo Yidur Le'an Pein Asara Mashma D'Avko Lechadchila. It's only Lechadchila, meaning when this Gemara says but Tzarich Lo Yidur B'Fnei Asara, that means to say that's the best form of expressing it, but it's not the only form of expressing it. The Beis Yosef, who is whom? Who's the Beis Yosef? Rav Yosef Karo, in commentary on the Torah, on the Torah, that's how he started. He first made a commentary on the Torah, and then he wrote the Shulchan Aruch as a summary of his commentary. He quotes the following on the top of page 7. He says, in the middle of the line, Zu Yisforas Rabbeinu, to diak milishnu de Gemara. The Torah is clearly looking at the Gemara and saying, you need to have 10, implying lechatchila, but not b'diavad. He says, this Gemara, v'ein adiok nir be'enai. He says, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's the right way to read the Gemara with all the greatest of respect. To Adarabba, lishna de tzarich mashma sheyesh iku b'dov v'chein da'as Rabbeinu Yana k'may she'echta b'samach. The Beis Yosef says, no. You need 10 people. So if you have to wait. But you need to get 10 people. You can't just dispense of it with your 3 best friends. And that's how it plays itself out in Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, again, being Rav Yosef Karo, says, Tzarich levarech bracha zu b'fnei asara. You need to have it in front of a minyan. Utreminai rabbanon should be the best that 2 are people who are learned. Dirsiv v'ramamu b'kalam v'moshe zekenim yaluhu. That's again from Tilim Kuf Zayin, which we just learned. V'im lo yishchichi rabbanon lo yanech mi levarech. If let's say you don't have learned people there, you should still say the bracha. But it's usually said after Kriyas HaTorah, because that's usually when there is a minyan. Let's say you did in less than a minyan. The Torah would say, that's it, you discharged your chiyuv. The Beis Yosef would say, you did not do your job. So you should say Birkas Hagomel again, but it was without Hashem's name, because Safek Brachas Lahakil, but the requirement of saying it again still requires there. That's the debate we just saw in the Torah and the Beis Yosef, depending on how they read the Gemara. Is the Gemara saying this has to be the way, or this should be the way? That's the question in how to translate the word tzarech. Right, that's the debate over here, which is said. So it sounds like a very significant thing to say the Birkas Hagomel in front of 10 people, which leads the question is, so what do ladies do? What do women do who go through the situation? So there are those in Jewish history who say, well, women don't get called to the Torah and aren't found in the minyan, so women don't need to say bracha. The Magen Avraham quotes such opinion, and nobody really seems to agree with that. Today there are poskim who suggest that, but in the end of the day, the vehicle, so to speak, the fact that it's more complicated to be in a minyan shouldn't affect the chiyuv, right? So that says the Aruch HaShulchan in source 16. There's no reason why women shouldn't say bracha. Okay? So it's done at the Kriyas HaTorah, and a lot of women are not here during the Kriyas HaTorah, certainly not during the week. So that might be the reason why the Magen Avraham says it's not the case, but certainly the women do say bracha. The Mishnah Berurah records 2 minagim. The Mishnah Berurah says, the Gam Noshem Minag Ha'olam. So he quotes a minhag that some people say that women just don't say Birkas Hagomel at all. Women generally aren't going to the minyan. But he quotes another opinion, which in the footnotes of the Mishnah Berurah is quoted in the Chaye Adam, among others. He says, she should say a bracha, the Birkas Hagomel in front of 10, and perhaps it should be a minyan of women and 1 man. Interesting observation. So women can and must say the bracha, and it can be in front of a minyan of women. Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked about this topic.
Well, what's wrong with the women saying it from the women's section?
No problem at all. No, we'll get that in a second. I just want to, but generally speaking, the minhag that's being reflected over here is that women did not come to shul. Women did not come to shul in general. And so how are they going to do this? They're going to make a minyan just for them. It might be a little uncomfortable. So in that case, that's where you see this minhag saying they shouldn't. But in general, many poskim certainly today say women do say it, and then they should do it in front of a minyan when that minyan is constructed. Now, the Rav Moshe finds this I read this tshuva and I was like, wow, I was shocked by this tshuva. I was really shocked by this. Take a look at this tshuva. This is a very important tshuva of Rav Moshe in Orach Chaim Chelek Hey, which is the 8th chelek of the Igros Moshe. It's he's speaking to his grandson, who he talks about in the first paragraph. He's so proud of that he's learning Torah so beautifully, and then in the second paragraph he says, "Inei be'etzem There's no reason to say that a man or woman have different responsibilities when it comes to Birkas Hagomel. Of course, a man and a woman have the equal responsibility to say Birkas Hagomel if they go through situations which require it. But they are certain requirements that are the extra requirements, like saying it at the time of the Torah and saying the minyan and so on, which the Chachamim applied to this. So just it is more complicated for women to do it because they're not called to the Torah and they're not there during the weekday, which is oftentimes when people do Birkas Hagomel. So, but that's the vehicle. That makes it more complicated to do, but that doesn't affect the fact that there's a chiyuv. So women should certainly say Birkas Hagomel. Now, notice over here in the smaller print, over here there's an addition that the editors added to the Rav Moshe. This is remarkable. It says Ad kan ksav yad kodshai. This is where he wrote with his hand. Shel Maran Zecher Tzadik Livracha. This is the last response that Rav Moshe wrote in his own handwriting, this tshuva. He tried 3 times to write this response, but he couldn't because of his inability to see at the time that he was trying to write this. It took a number of hours for him to write these lines that we just read in 2 seconds. And then at the end, they note that he added the following observation. He says, Al koponim b'fnei noshim, he says, Al peh hoisef shloike dahevi ha-mishnah berurah, siv koton gimel shetavarech b'fnei asar al koponim b'fnei noshim v'ish echad. It's not the way to make a minyan of women. He says, Elo she'ein inyan be'minyan shel noshim. That doesn't count as kahal am, as so to speak, a halachic minyan. It counts very much in terms of people and publicity, and it's a wonderful thing, but it's not technically a minyan. Certainly, she should say it in front of at least one person, but if she can make a minyan, she should make a minyan. Meaning to say at a minyan, which has become the minhag, and so in different shuls they have different minhagim. Whether it's a woman says either after the Birkas Torah or after the minyan in front of the Torah, or let's say they have there's a sort of shlishis at the house, and the woman has a minyan there. That's where they would say the Birkas Hagomel, but a person should certainly say Birkas Hagomel in this case. Which leads us to the third question: is what happens if I don't feel comfortable saying this? This is not just a woman's question, but a lot of times a woman says, I don't want to be the one to say this and say Birkas Hagomel. Can someone say it for me? Can my son? Can my husband? Can somebody else say it for me? And so that being the question, the answer is yes, but here's the interesting observation. This is the last part of the Gemara that we're going to look at today, which is, again, all our learning comes back to Tilim Kuf Zayin, which all comes back to the Gemara in Brachos Nun Dalet Nun Beis. The Gemara says, Rav Yehuda chalash v'itpach. So Rav Yehuda fell sick and then he recovered. So Rav Chana of Baghdad and the sages went to visit him after his healing. Amrulay, and I don't think this is the most sensitive of formulations over here, but they said to him, thank God, God gave us back to you and not to dust. So they say it's a way of saying, it's a way of saying, it's a good thing that you're still with us, right? So that's their way of saying it. Amar luhu patartun yasi mila oiduye. By saying such a statement, you have now exempted me from saying my blessing, right? Because you essentially said that. The Gemara says, so Abaya said you need to have 10 people, right? Again, the question comes back to the last point. But it was a big delegation who came to visit him. Okay, but he didn't say anything. So the Gemara says, "Lo tzarech to ani basrei amen." He said basrei amen. He said amen to their formulation. They said, "Oh my gosh, it's so nice and you're not dead." And he said amen. That was sufficient, as the Gemara says. Which leads us to an interesting observation, and that is you didn't need to say it. You didn't need to say it. So therefore, this happens to be an interesting matter of debate. So does that mean to say that anybody can say that? Can anybody say that statement on your behalf and thereby discharging your chiyuv for this. There happened to be an interesting debate. Take a look at the Beis Yosef again. Rav Yosef Kara on this comment, third line in, quotes, "Kos v'Rav Rabbi Manoach u'lefi divrayim ein ilmod misham lemisha eino rabbi." Who was saying this about Rav Yehuda was his student. And his student said, "Oh my gosh, it's wonderful that you're still here," because his student had a dear and beautiful relationship with his Rebbe. But somebody who's not a student, how do you have the rights? Maybe if there's some sort of benefit for the other person is a beneficiary of your survival, then maybe then they can say it for you. But you have to have a close relationship. The Bach, actually, on a similar note, makes this point in source 21, 4 lines in. He quotes this. The first word in the line is B'shil Te'ah Giborim. In the middle of the line, he says, "V'nira be'enai shimrotza adam levarech hagomel al oyavoy or al kroivoy shu koyevo lavarushes biyada akalashonai." If you're saying the Birkas Hagomel for somebody you're related to, somebody you have a relationship with, you care about, you're allowed to. Beis Yosef Kosov, even though the Beis Yosef quotes the Rashba, Da'ad Baruch Rav Chana Bagdadato V'Rabbanan Al Rufu V'Rab Yosef Rav Yehuda Hanu Lefisha Yerabba Mashmo Sheim Eino Rabba Lo Yavarech. Even though the Beis Yosef seems to limit it specifically to the case of a Rebbe situation, Hainu Be'ein Lo To'eles Ba'atzalasai. That's when you have no relationship. But if you have a relationship, you care about the person, you're related to them, you can certainly do this as well. Which is why the Shulchan Aruch says very explicitly, as we move to the very end of our shir today, in source 22, the Shulchan Aruch says, "V'imbireich acher v'omar baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher gemolcha kol tov." Hashem did goodness by you, v'ana amen. And the person who's the person who went through the situation says, "Yes, amen. I verify that." That's sufficient. That's enough. And the Ramah says, even though the person who went through this never went to see, he wasn't sick. Because you're saying on behalf of the person, you're so happy that they went through this. And that's why it says in the Mishnah Berurah, well, Kol Shekain in source 23, Al Ishtoi Shikagufa Dershai Levarich, Mize Noagim Ksas Anoshim, Shekashiyoldos Nishosayim, V'choizos Uluburion, V'oimdim, Umavarich in Birkas Hagomel, Kashi Tanya Amen, Al Birkasa Yotzas Bozeh. So therefore, the minhag in certain circumstances is, let's say a woman gives birth, which is a life-threatening situation. So then, when she comes back, a lot of times the husband will say the Birkas Hagomel, but he will say it, Asher Gomaleich Kol Tuv, referring to you, her. And when she says Amen, it's not about everybody else. It's her saying Amen, which works, because why? He cares about her. So that therefore would necessitate that as well. So the requirement would be somebody who cares about another person. This could work for a man or a woman. The point is, the case of Rabbi Yehuda wasn't a woman. It was just the fact that his students cared about him enough to be able to say it. So do I need to say it myself? Not necessarily. Somebody else can say it on my behalf. But if a woman would like to say it, with the greatest of pleasure. So what a lot of times happens, and this you'll sometimes see at a bris this happen as well, which is actually a beautiful thing, is that sometimes a woman will say her Birkas Hagomel after the bris. It's been 8 days, and there's a minyan there, and she's in shul, right? So a lot of times a woman will say Birkas Hagomel at that point in time. A beautiful thing, because that's a perfect example of this. Sometimes she won't be in the right state of mind for now. There's lots of other things on her mind, and therefore this is not the right time. And sometimes some women will say, "I don't really want to be in that limelight of making a whole thing. My husband will do it, but it should be that the woman is there." So let's say a woman doesn't want to say Birkas Hagomel herself, wants her husband to do it. That's the case, yes. But the woman should be in shul to say Amen, because she is just having her husband as the proxy to say it, or somebody else saying it as their agency to be able to say Amen, as is the case of Rabbi Yehuda. Yes, Yossi.
What about if the doctor with a sick child?
Good question. So what about katanim? So the same Mishnah Berurah that we learned about, a katan does need to do it, and so it depends how old they are. Let me just come back to you on this. So ratio test. So Mishnah Berurah says, the Mishnah Berurah says a katan doesn't need to, technically speaking. However, I would just looked at this recently. Let me just pull this out right now. I believe that the father or mother is able to do this on their behalf, but should say it on their behalf unless they are. Let me just make sure I get this this is correct. Yeah, cotton in Birkas Hagomel. So yeah. Yeah. וכן המנהג בספש בכל תוסס ישראל, אם כי קיימים כמה משיטות הפוסקים הסוברים שקוטן שהגיע לחינוך יבורך הגומל. There are those who suggest that unless a cotton reaches the age of chinuch, who realizes that they went through a very dangerous situation, they should say it themselves. They should say it in the language which they understand. If let's say a person, God forbid, a child was a child when they were sick and they recover after baro bat mitzvah, they should say it themselves. But in many situations, a parent will say it on behalf of their children. That's the minhag that I've seen. Yes?
Let's say 100 people get off a plane. Can one guy get up and say, Shigamalanu?
So planes is a good question. The planes, there's a lot of literature about planes and so on, because it seems to be like, today it's like getting on the bus to a large degree. But having said that, the basic shitta is out there is that if the plane flies over water, we enter into the situation of the gomel just for the fact of sea wayfaring as well, which is why Saul tongue-in-cheek pointed out that if a person has a biopsy in the desert, then we would solve this whole issue, right? So, but be it as it may, if a person goes over water, so generally speaking, national flights people don't say Birkas Hagomel. International flights people do say Hagomel, and if a person were to do it like that, one would say on behalf of everybody else, that's a fantastic idea. Maybe the El Al captain could suggest that. Yes, Adam. Yeah.
There are many medical problems that 50, 60 years ago would have been fatal, and now we just take it for granted because they're so routine. If we said it 50 years ago, Hagomel, are we still saying?
I'm not sure if it's really routine today. I'm not sure if it's necessary. It depends on the degree of zakana and the degree of if there's general anesthetic. You're right. Baruch Hashem, we live in such incredible times as well. Yossi?
Over water means what? You're going over, crossing the ocean? You're going farther to the
Yeah, no. I think we're really crossing the ocean. I don't know if it means that you're going over the Bay of Florida or Lake Michigan. But so it's. I mean, Lake Michigan's a 20-minute flight. Let me tell you, it's not a little pond. But be it as it may, generally speaking, we wait for international flights. Yes.
So Moshe makes a point in his shuvah about that it was sort of normative that you say bench gomel in the context of an aliyah.
Yep.
Right? So does that have for example, let's say the person who's getting the aliyah is shlishi, and now he's going to bench gomel. What comes first, kaddish for the balkoreh?
Oh, good question. Good question.
I would have said, based on Rav Moshe, we would think he should it's really tied to the aliyah.
Excellent question. I need to do a little more research because it comes up all the time. I usually think Kaddish, but I had to do the research.
I would have